Today on Beyond 6 Seconds.
I decided I wanted to make an impact through storytelling. So I decided I'm going to share some of my stories, and I'm going to ask some of my male friends and some of my female friends to help spread the same message, and hope that in sharing our stories and in talking about our experiences that we can help drive change.
Welcome to Beyond 6 Seconds, the podcast that goes beyond the 6-second first impression to share the extraordinary stories and achievements of everyday people. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel. On today's podcast, I'm speaking with Katharine Griffiths. Katharine is a telecommunications veteran who's channeling her passion for gender equality into helping companies drive successful gender diversity agendas. Her strengths in operations, writing, and public speaking, together with her extensive experience having worked in a male-dominated industry, make her an expert corporate advisor for companies ready to make the transition to a more gender-neutral workforce. Katharine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Carolyn.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to have you here. So tell me, how did you first become interested in the topic of diversity and inclusion?
Well, as you said, I worked in the telecommunications industry for 22 years. It's a very male-dominated industry and probably one level a bit more antiquated than just tech in general. Mm-hmm. I did find quite a bit of success working in that industry, but like my female coworkers and colleagues and friends, I also had many challenges. Some of those challenges included lack of opportunity at times, as well as sexual harassment. Mm-hmm. In parallel, I was watching as other industries, like the financial industry where my brother is employed, were really making bold moves to disrupt areas of leadership that would have been traditionally harder for women to break into on their own. Mm-hmm. In telecom, there was a lot of soft talk about getting women into the executive pipeline, but there wasn't a lot of active engagement and conscious effort to make it happen. So I decided that I would leverage my experience to help drive change through storytelling.
Oh, so having this experience must certainly have helped inspire you to start working more closely in this area. But what actually inspired you to build your brand around gender diversity, specifically in the whole range of diversity and inclusion?
There were really three big things that happened in the last 5 years that triggered me to take the initiative to have an impact. The first one, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but Emma Watson did a very impassioned speech at the United Nations back in, I think it was 2014. It was the He for She campaign that was being launched. And when I watched her speak, I was so inspired by her passion and commitment, even at her young age. And I realized that the message she was sharing, that really men need to step up and help women break through some of the barriers to get to equality. I realized that was a really important message. The second thing, I'm not American, I'm Canadian, so I truly hope that this doesn't come off as controversial. But when Trump was elected president of the United States, and some of the stories were coming out around the way he treated women and some of his more misogynistic behavior in history, that really hit a nerve. For me, I have a 21-year-old daughter who's just getting started in her career and a 19-year-old son who I hope I have taught to have a healthy respect for women. But it really struck a nerve for me. And then the kicker, number 3, was I had read an article recently, like maybe inside the last 6 months, that predicted that at our current pace, it would be another 100 years before we achieved equality. And I thought, that is not good enough. Mm-hmm. I thought about my daughter. I thought about all of her brilliant, amazing friends. And I thought, we need to be better for them. And because of my experience and because of my history and because of the success that I did found and the connections I made in my network, I decided I wanted to make an impact. And I had been doing research on how to go about doing that. And one of the very valuable techniques is through storytelling. So I decided I'm going to share some of my stories And I'm going to ask some of my male friends and some of my female friends to help spread the same message, and hope that in sharing our stories and in talking about our experiences, that we can help drive change. So that's really those three things. And then my love for my kids and my strong desire for them to have a different experience were key motivators.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great to bring in the element of storytelling, because it's such a part of the human experience, as well as how we do business. You know, whether you call it out as storytelling or it's just part of your everyday business, it's just a really important way to share messages and have impact. And I would think in some ways change people's minds and their actions. So that's a really interesting approach, and I think could be really impactful.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about the brand that you're starting now around gender diversity and some of the content you'll be writing and some of the stories that you'll be telling.
That's a great question. And I have been working with partner organizations to help me figure out the best way to brand that. And what we've decided, or what I've decided, is that I'm going to brand myself. It's my experience, my history, my connection, and my passion for this that define the brand. So really, it started out so organically. I just started to share my story, share my voice on LinkedIn. I've published about 6 articles so far. I have been getting a lot of attention on those articles, which is great.
Great.
So I'm going to continue with that on a regular basis, but I'm also working currently on a video series. So I'll take the content that's in the article and pull them together in a video format as well, so that I can hit at the audience that prefers to watch videos over reading articles. And I'm connected with a few of our local media agencies. So I'm working to get some of my articles published in our local newspaper, and then making connections to be a go-to woman in tech locally when different stories around gender diversity, or gender equality come up in the news. Also, I'm building out a workshop based on some material, something I call the ABCs of driving a gender diversity agenda. Mm-hmm. And we can talk more about that later. Yeah. And I'm also available to consult boards and senior executive teams on how to effectively implement a change management program around gender diversity and equality. And also, as you're aware, there is a book in me too. So far, it's just getting started, but so far I do have the full outline drafted, and I've written the introduction chapter. My goal is to finish that off, at least the first draft, in August, September timeframe, and then take it to a few publishing agencies to see what I can make happen with it.
That's great. So you really are putting together a lot of different content and different types of media. I know you had mentioned as part of what you're trying to bring to light is to drive a gender diversity agenda. And I just wanted to explore and learn a little bit more about what that looks like. What's part of that gender diversity agenda that you're interested in driving with corporations?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to share. So really, it is the ABCs of driving gender diversity. So what I've created are 6 pillars of transformation. I have a lot of background in change management, so a lot of these 6 pillars of transformation were influenced by the types of roles I've held in my career in telecommunications, but also in the writing, I've been identifying steps to follow. So there's 6 pillars of transformation. Pillar number 1 is to admit that action is needed and then actively engage in making change happen. Mm-hmm. The second pillar is to recognize that there's real business value in having more gender balanced boards and executive teams. There are lots of studies that have been done by very reputable organizations globally that prove the return on sales and the return on invested capital are much greater with a balanced leadership team. Mm-hmm. The third pillar, which also is so necessary now, is cost avoidance. So we know what the hashtag #MeToo activity triggered, a firestorm of women standing up against sexual harassment, sexual assault, etc. Mm-hmm. I want to help companies avoid the costs of those missteps. So what are some concrete actions that organizations can take to make sure they don't get caught up in any of these issues in the future? And then the fourth pillar is really around education and awareness. In reality, we're all just human. Men and women, we're way more alike than we are different. And in that respect, there really should not be a concept of traditional roles. That just happens to be a history that has taken us to where we are now, but it's not real. We're more the same than we are different. Mm-hmm. But where we are different, where we do have strengths that can be brought to the table, what we want to do is be able to leverage those strengths. And that's where the natural differences or the more natural tendencies of women can be embraced in what's traditionally been more male dominated or male hierarchical structures to change the dynamic a little bit, to drive some more growth and innovation.
I see.
Pillar 5, and this is where the controversy comes in a lot of the time, is around goal setting. So really, to make any concrete action, quotas need to be set. People don't like the idea of setting quotas because they feel like they're forced into a corner. And what if it doesn't work? And what are we going to do if this happens? And what are we going to do if that happens? And so it really does create a lot of conflict. The really great thing about conflict is that it opens the floor for dialogue. So as intimidating as conflict can be, when you let it exist, you can have an open conversation about it, talk about what's working, talk about what's not working, identify creative solutions for the problems that are surfacing, figure out different ways to approach the problem so that maybe you can solve it a different way. And then the final pillar, pillar number 6, is to measure progress. How are we doing? Are we achieving our quotas? Have we identified enough creative solutions for some of the disruption that's happening? How are we balancing the organizational culture as we go through these changes? Continually measure progress and look for things that are working, things that aren't working, and try to leverage more opportunities to do better and try to fix some of the issues that have surfaced. So 6 pillars of transformation.
Wow. Yeah, you're really looking across the entire process of how do you inspire people to make the change, and then how do you put that into action and then measure your progress. Yeah, a really thorough methodology. I almost hate to ask this question, but I sometimes think it does need to be asked, unfortunately. Why is it important to drive gender diversity in the first place in business? I mean, aside from the fact that you're not leveraging half the population's talents if you're not doing it, but do you wind those benefits into people who literally just don't see the benefit to their business or why they should be doing it? Is that part of your messaging?
Yeah, that comes in around the education and awareness step. So pillar number 4 is where we really will talk about where there's value in some of the more traditionally feminine ways of approaching business, approaching problem solving, approaching relationship building, to balance out maybe some of the more negative attributes associated with what has been considered a more naturally male approach to doing that. But really, I mean, where it matters most to the people who are sitting in a boardroom or at a senior executive team and they're talking about dollars and cents mm-hmm. and how are we going to make money at this? There's really 3 things. So the first one is there is business value in doing this. It's shown 26% increased return on sales for companies that have a more balanced representation of women versus men as compared to those companies who don't have any women at the board and senior executive level at all. So when you're talking about 26% of a multi-million-dollar sales revenue target, that's a lot of money mm-hmm. that's being left on the floor. It's not even being achieved. And then the second one is really cost avoidance. The story of Nike struck me where, a group of women inside of Nike just thought, we've had enough. And so they went around and surveyed, a bunch of other women in the organization and found that a lot of them were having trouble with, exclusion, sexual issues, many problems around lack of opportunity. And so they penned a letter to the executive team, and we saw the gentleman who was he was in line for the CEO position, exited Nike.
Yeah.
Just a few weeks ago, as well as a number of other senior executive levels. So business value is shown, but there's a significant number of costs that can be incurred by companies who don't make this action, where there are just more women in the pipeline. There are just more women around to sort of balance some of those missteps or avoid some of those missteps.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely makes sense. And it's really stunning when you hear more and more stories come out. It's always sad when those stories continue to come out, but at the same time, it's not really a surprise anymore, which is kind of sad in itself. It really is a pervasive problem that people have not talked about, even though we've made attempts with like legislation and diversity programs. Employee resource groups are really big to bring opportunities internal in a lot of companies, but still, despite all the attention, a lot of effort and investment that companies have made, there's still so much progress to be made. And it's such a challenge. When we had talked earlier about the particular methodologies that you're driving, you talked a lot about conscious effort and disruption. Within conflict comes the opportunity for dialogue and hearing different opinions and really understanding points of view and driving change forward. That definitely sounds like someone with a change management background. And certainly, because that is a huge part of change, is going through the conflict, because anytime you're making a change, conflict is certainly part of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think your methodology, if it's going into that conflict and encouraging people to talk and share opinions and then reaching a conclusion together, I think is important and might be a missing piece in a lot of programs that I've seen around diversity inclusion. So I think that's an interesting approach.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with you. You hit the nail on the head there. That's hard to let conflict surface, and change is hard. But if you can have the dialogue, then it opens everyone's eyes to see things a little bit differently.
Oh, and what's the third way that gender diversity impacts a company's bottom line?
The third one is what is meaningful to boards and executive teams is innovation. So when you have a group of people making business decisions or product decisions or portfolio decisions, and they all share similar backgrounds, they all have the same history, they're going to tend to look at that whole picture in a very similar way. And so by injecting more women into the discussion, you make more money because you create more innovation, because you have a whole new set of eyes looking at the products, the portfolios, the problems that society needs to solve. And so there's a lot of growth and innovation potential that's really currently mostly untapped.
Yeah.
I think about things like me and my history. When I started out in telecommunications, I used to have to carry a pager. Mm-hmm. But I was still pretty girly, so I liked to wear sundresses in the summer or high heels and slacks that didn't have a belt. Mm-hmm. And I hated carrying a pager because I had nowhere to put it. It looked clunky. It did not look nice with what I was wearing. And at that point in time, I was young. But at that point in time, I realized I wish somebody would create wearable tech. 22 years later, wearable tech is everywhere. And now, you get a Fitbit, looks sporty, but you can go onto Amazon and you can buy a beautiful bracelet finish for your Fitbit. So you can still look feminine and still have the tech. And so I always think, as a proof point in terms of innovative potential, we could have been creating wearable tech 20 years ago if there had been women making product decisions back then. So now you're getting more women in the tech executive pipeline. You're getting more women influencing tech decisions, more companies aware of women as consumers, and these things are being created. And this is just the beginning. There's so much more that can be created when we start to look at things from a more female perspective.
Absolutely. And the whole concept of really hearing those diverse voices within your own company and within your customer base really drives innovation. Mm-hmm. And an important point to note is, especially with the wearable tech example you just shared, is yes, that would have been great for you as a consumer and a user of telecom devices, but that would be a great thing for the men too. It's not just, we have to make a special pager for women because they don't have pockets and belts. It's like wearable tech that's for everyone now. So coming up and understanding those diverse voices, it helps everyone at the company. It's not just one particular group of people. It really helps drive forward innovation by forcing you to think differently about how to look at current business challenges and problems and opportunities.
I agree 100%. You hit the nail on the head, Carolyn, for sure.
So you've got your 6-point methodology, and then you're also using storytelling in your brand. How does the storytelling fit in with the methodology, or does it? How does that go together?
So for me, storytelling is something new. I didn't really realize that it was a talent of mine, but coupled with my ability to communicate well, written or verbal, and my compassion for people, I really care about people and how their experiences affect them. And I really want to understand their perspective as best I can. I figured by taking those two things that I knew were strengths of mine and then interweaving storytelling through them, my hope is that I can change the perspectives that people have by touching them. And we touched on this earlier, but by really touching them at a visceral level, have them really feel what the experiences for women in male-dominated environments can be like. And maybe by them at a visceral level, really feeling those experiences, it might alter their perception just slightly and then open their eyes to maybe a different way of looking at things or approaching situations or being sensitive to, different challenges or different environments. So that's how I want to pull the storytelling in. I have my own stories, but I also have stories from some of my male colleagues. I have stories from a lot of my female friends and colleagues. So just by interweaving those stories into the message, the hope is that I hit at the feeling level.
Yeah, I think it's important for any kind of change to really, as you said, have it hit at the feeling level, so that people can have their own insights about why changes need to be made. And storytelling is one effective way to do that.
Right,
Absolutely.
Exactly. Bang on.
So you mentioned that storytelling is a relatively new skill that you discovered that you had. How else do you use your talents and skills in your new brand that you're developing?
Well, so change management is one of the skills that I have. So that helps me come up with the 6 pillars of transformation. And I understand the challenges that exist around change management, how, you have early adopters, you kind of have the mainstream of people who will follow along because they have to. And then you have the dissenters and the ones who are really pushing against the change and how to bring them along. So, the early adopters are easy. They get the message. So you don't really want to focus on them. Really, the way to help the disruptors or the people who are pushing against the change to understand is to help them to feel the experiences of why the change is important. But and this is where the communication aspect comes in, the other key tactic is to really hear what they're saying about why it's hard, why they don't want the change, why they think it's not the right way to go, why they think it's going to be too hard or to achieve or too much of a challenge to implement. Really hear those people and then help them see the counters to those things over time, slowly. And then just bring them along. They'll be influenced by the early adopters and the rest of the mainstream. But they also don't want to be left unheard. So make sure that they're heard and then help them along.
Yeah, absolutely. If people feel free enough to share their concerns, if you can talk them through, a lot of times those people will become some of your biggest advocates when they feel like they've been heard and they understand what the change is.
I would love to tell you about the feedback I've been getting so far, because I think it's really appropriate based on what you just said, that some of the disruptors can be your biggest advocates when you can flip their perspective.
Absolutely.
So for me, it's my male friends. Not that I don't care about what the women are saying. I have lots of female friends, but I think that for the most part, the majority of them kind of get it. They understand why this is important and they see the value for them. But my male friends, it was actually my brother who sent me a quote. It said, "For the privileged, equality can feel like oppression." So for a lot of my male friends, they just are going with the flow. I mean, they just living their life. They're not doing anything on purpose to hurt or to harm anybody. And now all of a sudden everybody's mad at them. So and I told you, I'm very compassionate. So I care really deeply about that. And so that's the feedback I'm looking for. I want to hear what my male friends and colleagues are saying. And it's not always rosy. Some of them are saying, I don't want to even have the conversation. I like things the way they are, and I'm perfectly okay with them staying exactly this way for the next 100 years. Some of them say, this is never going to happen. I mean, it just is the way it is because it's just meant to be that way, and it's never going to change. Others of them have challenged me and say, I don't even see that there's a problem. I mean, I've worked with tons of women in my career. I've even had bosses who are women, so I don't even know where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. And then some of them say, I really hope something positive comes out of this. I think about the experiences that my wife has had. I think about my daughters who are entering the workforces and the challenges that they have ahead of them. And I really hope that what you're doing gets some traction. But there's one thing that really makes me do my happy dance in my office chair. And that's when my male friends like or comment on my posts on LinkedIn. Because they then make it safe for the other guy to also comment and to also say something about it and to not let their opinions be intimidated by other people's opinions. So it's exactly what you just said. That's why I wanted to say it now, because what they're doing, what they do is they create a safe place for the other men to have the discussion as well.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Looking forward, you've recently created this brand and are just starting it up now, but what are your goals for your brand long term?
Well, I think I mentioned a lot of this started out really organically. I left the company that I was working for in December and just felt compelled to write. And so that's how it started. And I'm going to just continue to let it grow that way and see where it takes me. I'd be absolutely thrilled to be recognized as an expert for gender equality in the tech world. I'd love to have the opportunity to share my stories, guidance, and wisdom with board members and senior level executives and with young professionals. I really want to help these people benefit from what I really strongly believe is new growth and innovation and earnings, real dollars that are going to be created by increasing female representation.
Right. That's great. And it sounds like with the experience that you've had in the industry and all of your different skills in storytelling and communications, change management, that you're really well positioned to do that. So that's really exciting.
Thank you. Yes, that's what I'm hoping for sure.
So how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your brand and the type of work that you're doing for diversity and gender equality?
Well, I'm building out my website. It's katharineGriffiths.com. And note the 2 A's in Katharine. It's an unusual spelling. It's still a work in progress, but I'm expecting it to be completely built out just in the next few weeks. Also, they can feel free to email me at katharineGriffiths@outlook.com. And I'm on Twitter at Kathy A. Griffith. And I'm available on LinkedIn as well. And that's where most of my articles will be published, will be on LinkedIn as a platform. I'll be leveraging that quite extensively.
Okay, perfect. So I will put your contact information in the show notes of the podcast so that people can find it there as well and get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what you're doing. Is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know or anything that they can help or support you with?
Yeah, there is one thing. It's really important for me. I am not an angry feminist at all. In fact, my whole life, I found it so much easier to work with men. I'm a little bit aggressive, way too direct at times, and really competitive. I'm in a local golf league. It's a women's golf league. We play 9 holes every Tuesday. And the women always tease me that they're going to kick me out because I'm too competitive for the women's league. Anyway, all that to say that I always found that men accepted me a lot more readily. And so I really loved kind of being one of the guys and hanging out with all men. But I can see that there's big changes coming. Women are coming out in full force. They're really taking a stand. They're challenging in so many different ways. It's a transformation that we're in, and the fire that is being fueled is that of millennia of oppression of women, and it's not going to be stemmed easily. My worry is that I don't really think that the men are paying attention, especially men like C-level executives and board members. I don't think they're prepared for what is coming, what's happening. And so that's what motivates me. I want them to be ready. I want to educate them on why it's important to embrace these changes and guide them through how to be successful in this changing business landscape. So I'm really here to help. I think that's the key thing. I'm not angry. I want to help.
Yeah, I think between, the attention that's being paid, plus I would imagine a lot of men probably feel defensive, like they're suddenly at fault.
Yeah,
so that's, I could see that as being a barrier to conversation and change. But your methodology of really, addressing those conflicts head on and talking through it, I would think would make it a lot more effective for driving that change and helping to, make sure everyone's heard and move forward with new ways of doing business. So I think it's a great contribution that you're making to diversity inclusion with your new work.
Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate your feedback.
Sure. Well, thank you again for being on the podcast, Katharine. Really excited to hear all about your story and your journey. And thanks again for being my guest today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Beyond 6 Seconds podcast. Please subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player so you won't miss any episodes. You can also find all the show notes and links we discussed in this episode at our website, www.beyond6seconds.com. Until next time.